us, getting to yes through innovation in regulated industries. So how many people here are entrepreneurs in some sense or some way? Quick raise of hand. Great. The exciting thing for us is that for financial services and healthcare, it touches everyone, not just in this room, but worldwide. But at the same time, because it's so impactful and it touches so many people, we find that with the undue burden and the regulations, that people are really reluctant to play in that space and really innovate. But our esteemed panel today will actually go through how that works within their organizations and different models that they've seen worked really well. So I'm Young Pham. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for Comerica CI&T. I'll turn it over to my colleagues to introduce themselves as well.
Sure. I'm Christy Brandon. I work for Comerica Bank. I'm based in Detroit, Michigan. And I run the digital channel for the retail bank of Comerica.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Hayun, and I lead digital strategy and innovation at Marina Maher Communications. We're a full-service shop in New York, and I work a lot in regulated industries, specifically in healthcare and pharmaceuticals. So my job is to kind of bridge that divide that sometimes exists between the innovators and the established behemoth companies that are looking for innovation but don't know where to find it and what's safe out there.
And I'm Carrie Sloan, and I lead a department called the Global Content Lab at Johnson & Johnson. And it's proof positive of innovation at a Fortune 50 company. This department didn't exist 2.5 years ago. And so we're bringing in new capabilities and new business problems to solve, and as a result, new partners and new platforms.
Great. So let's get started. And I know some of the things we always look at, particularly in organizations as big as some of the companies you guys work for, is how that culture is fostered and how innovation develops. And I know, Carrie, there was an interesting thing that you talked about for Johnson & Johnson relative to how that comes from the top down. Do you want to share with the group here?
Sure, yeah. I mean, just to give you a sense of it, J&J is the largest broad-based healthcare company in the world. We're about 130,000 people globally. We're headquartered in New Brunswick. But our CEO, Alex Gorsky, for us, it very much comes as a mandate from the top down. We actually think of ourselves as a 132-year-old startup. And when you think back to the origins of Johnson & Johnson, I call it vintage innovation, because where did the Band-Aid come from? It was one of our early employees whose wife kept burning herself while she was cooking. And the first Band-Aid was sterile gauze that's now an iconic brand for the company. We still think like that. I think all of us have been at South by, and the headline that I'm hearing is nobody can believe how fast the pace of change is accelerating, and that's not lost on Fortune 50 companies. We know that we have to continue to evolve and innovate.
Yeah, I think that's a great story, and that's excellent for Johnson & Johnson. And it's similar at some other companies, and it may not always seem like that. Or it might not actually be coming from the top. So one of the things that I've noticed with several of our different clients is you need to think of different ways in. So whether it's coming from the top, whether there's a specific angle, always going in with what is in their best interest, but making it relatable to solving their business problem and something that they can equate it to. So for instance, we talk a lot about AI and chatbots, let's say. Well, in the pharma space, that can seem scary, but when you equate something like chatbots to a call center operator who, in the old days, and you're often talking to older people who are making the decisions at these companies, well, if you can equate it to when the operator had the manual and they'd have to flip to different places in the binder to tell their story, well, now it's just automated. So if you can equate what technology and innovation is now to something that they can relate to, it can kind of break down those barriers and make it seem less out there.
And I'll just speak in general first from the banking industry. I would say we've been a little slower to adopt to innovation, but part of that is the role that we play in people's lives, right? We are responsible for your finances, and so it's on our shoulders to make sure that we're keeping our customers safe. So it's a balance between how much can you innovate, how fast can you move, versus making sure that we have the safety and soundness to go with it. 15 years ago, I'm not sure you would have heard the word innovation in the same sentence with bank or even financial institution. But clearly, that's where the industry needs to go, and we've been seeing the disintermediation because of the slowness to get there. So in general, financial institutions are looking for ways to bring that innovation to the table, knowing that we are really lagging behind.
And in this process, when you guys think about how you do new experiments and go through innovation, how do you guys work with regulators? How do you bring them into the process as part of this? And I'll start with you on that, Christy.
Yeah, so we actually work very closely with the different regulators that govern Comerica Bank. We participate in an industry organization, and just yesterday I was at the committee meeting for the digital side of that organization, and we had the CFPB come in and talk to us a little bit, which was actually a little eye-opening for me, because it became very clear that each governing body is not really very well connected to each other. So, you know, the CFPB wants us to innovate because they're trying to represent the consumer. And so the questions were to us of, why aren't you innovating? Why aren't you bringing more to the table? Well, because this arm over here won't let me without checking off all these different boxes. So, you know, I think being connected is really important. And advocating, we'll go on Hill and we will advocate for different subjects and for our consumers to make sure that it's easy and fast.
Yeah, it's similar in the healthcare space. We take it very seriously in terms of security, in terms of making sure we're bringing the best to our clients, our customers, patients, our healthcare providers. So when we work with regulators, it could take a few different forms, because when we're doing something like social media, there actually aren't set guidelines. So we kind of have to self-regulate and think about what we think is fair and in the best interest of the consumer. There's also times when we'll bring in consultants, people who used to work at the FDA, people who can advise on what they think the regulations and the regulators will think of our product or solution. So when we have that kind of check, it helps when we're bringing something to our clients that might seem innovative, or when we're bringing something to the FDA, because there's kind of that stamp of approval, and we've anticipated things that sometimes the things that regulators come up with we would have never thought of. So by having people who've come from the inside advise with us, then it helps all around.
I'm trying to think of some real-life examples to help bring to life what it looks like for you guys. My role at J&J is to do external storytelling in service of reputation, and even that is new because J&J is a famously humble organization, and internally what people say is you have to get caught doing good. You don't actually talk about it. And so they were looking to change that, and some of the examples that I've seen in the past couple of years, if you're looking to come into a multinational corporation, you can't come in and blow down walls. You have to take baby steps. And you have to find your partners within the organization. And Jen is right. First and foremost, we always have to be compliant, and that's front of mind. But when our pharmaceutical team was looking to launch Twitter, they said to me point blank, we started Twitter, we partnered with compliance, and for a year, we put up the most banal content on Twitter that we possibly could just to prove that the sky wasn't going to fall because we launched a Twitter channel. Other examples are we've been trying to figure out how do we tell pharmaceutical stories on the website and partner with compliance, because you have to have the important safety information that you would see in a magazine ad or in a TV commercial after each story. So we had a designer work on a couple of treatments where the information would unfurl. We're compliant and we're telling the whole picture, but we're trying to be innovative in the solution. And then our partners in pharma took it to the compliance team and said, hey, what do you guys think of this? Now, it's slow, the pace of change, and you have to bring people with you. But what's happened about 6 months later is we now have a small consortium of a couple of lawyers, a couple of compliance officers, and members of our team trying to get to a solution together. So it does happen in real life, it just doesn't happen overnight.
There's actually a good point about defining innovation. At one point, Twitter, even just in the last couple of years, was an innovation for J&J's pharma arm. So that's also another thing, is understanding what innovation means and what looks like new, and what your potential customer is ready for. We had a case just 2 years ago where we were trying to reach college-age women with a birth control option, and we couldn't get on Instagram because the company had never been on Instagram. And one of my colleagues literally sat with the lawyer at the company and got her on Instagram. She was 32. It's not like she was 80. And she just was afraid of Instagram personally, let alone from a corporate perspective. And so we sat with her, explained it, literally got her on there. And even after all of that, she didn't approve it. But we had such a strong business case in that sense, and a strong partner in our brand leader, that we were able to go over her head and escalate it. So having the right brand case and backing, you don't want to just do innovation for innovation's sake. You don't want to make people go too far ahead. It's often baby steps. But last year Instagram wasn't too big of a baby step. So, but it is important to understand where your potential client is, so that you bring them along on the journey and don't make them skip so many steps.
Carrie, I want to follow up with the point you made now that you're bringing in legal as part of this process, compliance a lot earlier. How important is that for cross-functional teams, particularly the people that police yourselves within the organization, not even the regulators, but within Johnson & Johnson?
Yeah, I think for anybody who's looking to partner with a major corporation, we call it highly matrixed in a job description. It means you're never going to come in and work just with me. I'm going to have a partner in legal, a partner in IT, a partner in compliance, and those are going to be our best friends for the duration of whatever we're trying to do. So when I was trying to bring in a new technology platform, every visit I went to with a new vendor, to bring somebody in new at J&J, where your security clearances are actually more stringent than the Department of Defense, you have to have 5 competitive bids. And I'm bringing the IT team along, and we are evaluating every option in parallel path from the business capability that I want to bring in, and does it meet all the clearances. And when we were launching social media channels, we found a like-minded lawyer who had some prowess in media to partner with us on creating social media guidelines. And that sort of become our go-to precedent if we want to start a new channel. Now at least we have this groundwork laid, and it becomes a lot easier than it was the first time. And I'll just give you one more funny anecdote just to show you how real it is. When we started to launch Instagram at Johnson & Johnson, the first thing that we had to do was go to security, because there was a blanket policy in place on every Johnson & Johnson campus globally that employees weren't allowed to carry a phone or take a picture. Now, obviously, this is before the time of cell phones, but first we had to do the 3 months of work to partner with legal and security to explain the use case for why we might want to let employees take pictures, and no, they weren't going to share, chemical compounds that were written on whiteboards in certain R&D facilities. And that's literally what it looks like to get to go or to get to yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say very much the same in the banking industry. It's just essential that we are working hand in hand with our compliance partners and bringing ideas to them before we make a decision whether we go forward, to understand their position. And something else that one of you just mentioned was also, looking out in the industry, not just banking, but just in general, technology and innovation, to see how other companies are handling this, whatever the risk might be, right? So, it was a few years ago we launched Touch ID, right? So you could get right into your app. Well, that was kind of a big deal. And, but being able to say, no, you know what, everybody else is doing it, and then trying to qualify that risk also, I think, is really important. So in some cases, yeah, the risk is just way too high and we're just not going to move forward. In other cases, it's risk, but it's like a 0.07% risk that would ever come to fruition, which at that point we can probably convince someone that we can take that on.
Yeah, so one of the sayings I like to say is everyone wants to be first to be second. So, it's one of those things where, especially in regulated industries, it's good to be able to point to your competitors and other use cases. So being cognizant of what's happening in the industry, what your competitors are doing, or even some parallel, like we can use the banking industry or the alcohol industry, other regulated industries in healthcare is kind of parallels if there's no one specifically in healthcare that's doing it. But that's often just another technique of how to get to yes, how to make, whether it's our internal partners, because you're right, in these highly matrix organizations, we have to bring everybody on board. So whether it's to kind of convince them or make them feel comfortable, or even to just make your own product better, it's always good to know what is out there.
Something that you said was very interesting when you have a new idea that may not be policed or governed pretty well. What is the role that you guys have in terms of self-policing, particularly a new innovation that may not have defined standards or things that either the regulators or your own internal compliance teams have? And so are there specific approaches that you take? Do you talk to other companies within your category, especially when it's something that's truly innovative and sort of out there as well? So, Christy, any thoughts on that?
I'm not sure I've ever run into that situation. No, I'm just kidding. But not very often. Well, yeah, definitely talking with peers is one thing. And again, if you are approaching it from thinking of it as a partnership, whether that's internal or external or other. So as I mentioned, being a part of the organization that is tied in very closely with our regulators, right? So we can have those conversations. We know they're not going to give us an official opinion, but directionally, whether they're comfortable or not, giving us some ideas of things we need to think about. Looking further out into the industry beyond banking to say, what are we seeing? What's going on out there? And partnering close with our compliance and security folks.
Yeah. You know, as an agency that's charged with innovation and as somebody who, personally feels passionate about it, we do have a responsibility to vet who we partner with, because if I were to bring a service or an offering to a client, it's a reflection on me, on my agency. So we absolutely need to do the proper vetting, make sure that we're not just giving something, giving a suggestion just to be cool. It really needs to solve the business needs of our client, and they need to be, a reputable company. They need to have the ability to scale. So I often get, cold calls or emails from people, and it's intriguing, and I love to hear about these new things because I personally and professionally want to, anticipate what's coming next. But if people don't have the ability to back it up or to really scale and partner, with a big company, I'm not going to be able to credibly propose the idea. So it's a little bit of a catch-22. You can't get big enough until you're working with somebody that pays you, but you can't start working with bigger agencies and companies until you have that scale and that kind of something that we can't live without, that's unique.
And I'm going to give you a real-life example because I think it brings it to life. When I came into J&J, we were re-platforming the corporate website because we wanted to do storytelling, and we needed to license a content management system, which was a different capability than we had needed in the past. We managed the website, it was static, and if you wanted to change anything on it once a year, it required you, another team member, and your favorite IT person, and about 4 hours of your afternoon to swap out a piece of content. So we were partnering with IT, and I emailed my contact, and J&J has amazing parental leave policies, and it said he was out on paternity leave, and to contact so-and-so, and so I emailed him, and he was also out on paternity leave. So if you're curious, how does new technology come into Johnson & Johnson? I started researching, and I called contacts and a CTO I knew from another company, but in the end, a member of my team was listening to a podcast about this company that was not one of the established players. It was a relative startup, but they had scaled globally, and that was one of our challenges. So they came in and did the demo, and one of the things that I really want to hammer home is it's about solving a business problem, but I'm also looking for a cultural fit for Johnson & Johnson. And when I met with those 4 different vendors, I ultimately went with the one who had scaled another company to 14 countries, so I knew that they could sate the need that we had. But I also knew they were going to be my day-to-day partners, and I would work with them every day. And they didn't have the arrogance, and they didn't have some of the other qualities that some of the more established players did. And they came in, and it wasn't easy. So I brought IT along on that entire journey. But then we'd always been a Drupal shop, and this was a different back end. And there would be all of these committees that would come out of the sky. Now you need to present it to the Enterprise Technology Operating Committee. Now you need to present it to the chieftains of the Enterprise Technology Operating Committee. And all in all, like, people have asked me, well, how do you bring in new vendors? We were talking about it earlier. It took about 9 months. So I want to, make it real to get an MSA, a master service agreement, for a vendor that hadn't been in J&J previously. But they re-platformed the site. We've relaunched the corporate site in China. We've relaunched the corporate site in India. And the way that things tend to happen in our large organization, at least, is it's word of mouth. So other colleagues have said, hey, I want a website that I can update that easily. Or, I've got this microsite, and I don't want to have to go to IT every time I want to make a minute editorial change. Who do you guys work with? And now that same vendor has proliferated within J&J and is working with a lot of our different sectors. So it wasn't slow, but if you build trust, and champion the team you're working with and solve their problem, then I'm going to champion you as well.
Yeah, that's I want to highlight what you said about the cultural fit, because that's another really important point, is that so many things can be commoditized, the coding of something or the whatever it might be. And so you want to be able to separate, and we talk a lot about customer service or relationships, and so much of getting to yes or having a long-term relationship is around how you manage each other. That you spend more time with the people you work with than your family sometimes. So if somebody's going to choose you and pay you, they want to it shouldn't be a struggle to work with you. So that kind of flexibility I often find with some more of the innovative or tech focused companies, that there's a little bit of, you mentioned before, like arrogance of, well, why don't you understand it, or you don't know what we do, and no, it doesn't matter how cool you are. It matters how you can explain what you do and make it something that we want to partner with you and learn from and work with you every day.
And I'll just add on a little bit. Trying to bring a new partner into the mix in the banking industry, I think in general, is a challenge, in my organization in particular, because we kind of are conservative on top of conservative on top of conservative. But the banking industry is regulated on our partnerships and the diligence that we do around our partnerships. So for a true innovative startup type of a company, it's really difficult to make it through all of the hoops that you would have to be able to work with our organization. So what we've done is we've started pivoting a little bit and looking at those companies that we already partner with, and let them vet out this vendor and then support them and resell their services. So we can do a contract with the vendor we already have, and they're kind of guaranteeing that this is a sound organization to work with. So that's one way we've gotten around it. Even with a partner, though, a contract process is a good 4 to 6 months. I'll be just very honest. So if it's something brand new, that goes at least 9, maybe 18 to 24 month process.
Yeah, and that's actually a great point, particularly with a lot of maybe the entrepreneurs in the room. How do I start to plug into these outlets where I can work with a Comerica, or I can go pitch with your agency or at Johnson & Johnson? What advice would you give them to start establishing those relationships or different avenues to actually get on the radar for some of the larger organizations like yourselves?
So, I would say, I think all of those large service providers that we work with, that we look to, have accelerator programs, right? So they are trying to see what's happening out in the industry and have a formal process for trying to get yourself into that accelerator class, if you will. So that's one way to do it, participating in like a Finovate type of a conference to try to highlight what you've got going on, or any of those types of opportunities where you have some more exposure, and truly it comes back to relationships as well, right? So leveraging those that that can help to champion your cause as well.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is networking. It's getting out there, it's showing, it's not just saying what you want to say, it's anticipating and saying what you think people want to hear. And I don't mean that in an obsequious way, I mean that in, what's in it for them. So how are you solving their business needs? How are you going to make their lives easier? And so making sure that you're, and also listening. I was talking with somebody from a very well-known social media platform, and they were so focused on their sales pitch and getting through their script. And I was giving them feedback and telling them very specifically what we were trying to do, and they had some information. They had kind of done their homework, but they had the wrong information about my company size, around our industries, and I was telling him, and it didn't matter. He was just going through his spiel. And so, you know, it doesn't make you feel confident that they would be a partner that listens to you or has your interests at heart. So yeah, networking and being a good listener and providing value. And then it's tenacity also, because getting into, you know, big companies, you do have to take rejection. You do have to send a lot of cold emails. You do have to persevere. But if you have the right target and you're strategic about it, you see people who are like at panels like this who are looking for innovation. That's a good start. So picking up on the clues and just being tenacious.
Yeah, I would say the networking. We found the last enterprise vendor we brought in through a podcast, telling your story and getting it out there. And we were talking earlier, do cold calls work? They do. But I would say, make sure you're talking to the right person. There's nothing worse than sending an email, following it 2 hours later and saying, hi, did you get my email? I wanted to talk to you about this. And I'll say, I'm sorry, that's not actually what my department does, but maybe you'd want to talk to so-and-so. Be patient. Because I've had somebody who actually said, I want to show you what my video production company does. Could we schedule a meeting? And I said, sure, absolutely. And by hook and by crook, that meeting had to move a couple of times. But the CEO of the company didn't give up. And by the time we finally got on the phone, I said, that's really interesting what you do. I think that could have a use case here. I can't think of anything right now, but there is this project that's coming down the road in 6 to 9 months, and I'm going to keep you back of mind, and I will. So research what the folks you're doing do, look them up on LinkedIn, read as much as you can about the company, and Jen's exactly right. Try to present how you can solve a problem for them.
Right. And in solving that problem, that's interesting in that. How are you guys goaled in terms of if you bring in innovative ideas? Certainly, are there specific metrics? Are there different milestones as advocates of innovation within your organizations that you're held to?
Well, I'm actually kind of gold on the opposite, right? So to be totally honest, you know, to make sure that we make it through an audit and don't have an issue. So it's a balance for sure in the financial services industry. So yeah, it's a challenge.
Yeah, for me, innovation is literally in my job title, and it's what we know as an agency and a service provider is where we need to continue to be going. But I think getting back to my point earlier around knowing where your customers are, knowing what they want to buy, where they are in that cycle of innovation. For some of my clients, going on Instagram really is the next step, and you know, you have to just be cognizant of that. And so that comes back to defining what innovation means, and you know, you still want to be giving ideas. You still want to be a partner in sharing what's coming next, even if it's not something that they're going to do or buy in the next 6 months. It's still, as a partner, it's a good thing to get people thinking, to spark those ideas. So that's something that, you know, certainly as an agency and part of my mandate is to know what's coming up on the horizon, and again, be patient with when you can actually execute it, but know what's coming, and be cognizant, like I said earlier, of what the competitors are doing as well, so that as soon as somebody in pharma goes on Snapchat, I can then tell all my pharma clients they're on Snapchat. Now we can be too. So it's that kind of awareness.
And I would say we're a new department, and so I do have KPIs to meet, and I have to demonstrate the return on investment of the headcount that we have. And so we have some vanity metrics. We're measuring traffic to the website, time on site, what is the engagement rate on social. And then we also have internal measures. So the things I would say for anybody looking to partner with a large organization is I'm always keeping a finger to the wind to figure out what's new on social and how can you help me demonstrate how people are feeling or what that feedback loop is. Is there a new sentiment tool that you're tracking? Is there something that you've built that can do better social listening that will show me who's paying attention to our posts? And then we have internal measures and reputational pillars that we need to hit. So I'm always looking for partners who can help plug in and integrate with those systems, because that's a part of how I'm telling my story.
Right. So in scenarios where, say, the innovation may not go the way that you would want it, particularly rolled out in your organization, what are some examples where, particularly on the bad, that we could be a learning opportunity for some of the people here?
I would say probably the top of mind example for me is Google Glasses. So, those came out, everybody was so excited, and, several in the industry were really pitching that. Well, it was just a little bit ahead of its time and not quite mature enough. And so, again, I just bring it back to this balance of understanding what's going to resonate with your customer, what are their needs, are you solving a problem? Because if you're not solving a problem, then you're just investing to invest in something that's cool. And for financial services, we don't want to be cool like that. It's definitely not our goal. So I think that's a great example, and just help to remind us that we got to slow down a little bit. You got to walk before you can run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely a good example. To me, what I think of is virtual reality. That's another thing that all of us here at South by use now. 2 years ago, people would line up to do something with VR, and now it's like, oh yeah, VR. And it's not something that is necessary to tell your story, and so it doesn't feel vital. So to me, that's one of the technologies that you have to use the right way. And healthcare does have so many opportunities for VR. Especially because you want to build empathy, you want to understand what people with certain conditions go through. There are definitely use cases for it, but I think that with VR, it definitely became the flavor of the month for a minute there. And it was, if you can do the same thing with less technology, then why do more just to be cool? And because you're not going to show the ROI, you're not going to get the response back. So making sure that you're right sizing the solution is important as well. So VR has certainly great capabilities and uses, but you have to really show the rationale.
And I'm going to take a slightly different example. We were planning Instagram, and out of that came this bigger idea. And it involved what could have potentially been a global contest for J&J. And so all of a sudden, on a tight timeline, we were looking to solve the problem of who could be our contest vendor. And somebody was recommended to me internally, and I loved the people who they had partnered with, and they had amazing thought leadership, and I met with the CEO, and I was super excited about the possibility, but it's a cautionary tale to anybody who's looking to partner with a company as big as J&J, because when I sat down with the IT team, I'd of course briefed them on everything that we were doing, and they came back to me and they said, Carrie, we looked into this company. By the way that you entered this contest is on a Google form, and there's absolutely no security clearance around this. We can't approve them. And it literally sent us back to the drawing board and was a setback. So to anybody who's approaching, make sure you do your homework and you know what sort of qualifications you need to have from an IT perspective or a legal perspective or a compliance perspective, depending on the case, to play.
So on that note, is it in their ability to come back and maybe find a different solutions? We talk about partnership a lot. And in that, one of the things we talked about earlier was that in the regulated industries, you guys understand that these are new ideas, new things coming out, so that they may not have all the answers. How do you help facilitate for them and just really do it really as a partnership growth into, hey, how does that technology adopt into something that we may have prior constraints around? I'll put that back at you,
Sure.
Barry.
I would say if the timelines are right, we could do that, but I think it's really important to build trust from the beginning, because once one of my stakeholders has a little bit of wariness around it, the fight is going to be that much harder to get to go.
Yeah, for me, it's I take a little bit more of a not mentorship, but just I might spend a little more time with a fledgling company that wants to break in, and give them some advice on, okay, you need to have these kind of baseline security measures in place, or you need to have metrics and actually be able to show how you're going to measure the impact of what you're proposing. So I give a little bit more advice to especially newer companies that are trying to break in, because as we said before, it's my reputation, it's my company's reputation when I bring somebody to a client. So I want to make sure they're best prepared and they're going to be the best reflection. So in that sense, it's a little bit of a quid pro quo. So I have to do it if I believe in what they ultimately are selling, what their ultimate value is, and if they need to, some help with the polish, like I would have advised that company, get out of Google Forms, so they wouldn't now face that obstacle and that automatic kind of rejection from IT. So as a partner to a lot of innovative companies, it's advising them and helping them get to check off those baseline things. And there's always going to be something, but as many of the things you can anticipate and prepare for, the better.
Well, and I think what Carrie said about doing your homework is just so important. If someone came to us with an idea that sounded kind of cool, but ultimately was against a regulation, well, you know what? I don't really want to talk to you anymore because you missed a really basic piece to what we do. And to be honest, there's so much innovation out there. There's not time. So if someone's coming to us who hasn't done their homework, you're kind of out, honestly. But then if they are understanding the business, if they are solving a problem, then it's more about advocating for them, because this is an idea that we think will help our customer and grow our business. And so if you run into a snag from a technology perspective, well, let's talk through this. Let's get our IT team, at the table as well and see if we can solve it. If it's a security thing, let's, build on our partnerships. If we're comfortable that this is safe, we just have to be able to kind of prove that out. So once, at least for me, once you build the trust there, then I'll become the biggest advocate and help to move it through and bring whoever I need to the table.
And then I won't hold you responsible for your specific industries, but are there very specific technology trends that you're seeing that are sort of leading the pack now, or an opportunity relative to some of the customer needs that you identified earlier that you're looking at?
So for us, it's moving faster. So you want to move your money, you want to move it right now. You don't want to wait 2 or 3 days for it to clear over there, and then you can't move it where you want because you have limits and such. So how do we move faster but still protect our customer? That's one of the biggest trends. The other one I would say is around AI. So that's where things are going. People want to be able to talk through a scenario. But again, you got to worry a little bit about privacy and security. But those are the 2 trends that we're following right now.
Yeah, certainly AI and specifically voice search. So Google, Alexa, being able to get an instant response or a relationship, or ask a question and get the right response that's personalized for you, that single result, or having a history of purchase, or of an example in diabetes is that you can give your glucose reading and you just say, Alexa, this is my glucose today. You do that multiple times a day. Well, maybe you're connected to Amazon and it knows how many test strips come in a pack, and it knows how many glucose readings you've given. So when when you have a few test strips left, it'll prompt you and say, "Oh, do you need more test strips? You want to order now?" "Yes," and it ships it to you. So that, I think, is the next, is where we're looking at really what we consider innovation and that ease in the healthcare industry, because that's often what we run into is compliance and adherence issues. So it's easier to keep somebody on therapy. So we want to make it as easy as possible and reduce as much friction as possible. So things like AI and voice search are going to help, I think, in that next phase of innovation for the healthcare.
And I would say a few things. I echo AI and voice. Anything that makes 130,000 people around the globe work more closely together. So we're trying to show up as one J&J. Intranet solutions are of interest. E-commerce externally is definitely of interest. Building a global digital ecosystem. And as my boss fondly puts it, 2018 is the year of process. So anything that we can do to sort of smooth out the entropy internally and make teams work more closely together, those technology solutions are always welcome.
Great, great. And where do you find your innovation ideas? Where do you source that with all your busy schedules or through that and all the inbound calls you have? What rises to the top, or how do you find those things that truly, truly are the things that you want to advocate for?
I look to the industry, honestly. You know, like I said, our service providers, they bring people to the table, different conferences. But to what Carrie said, I think, too, there's a lot more than you would think of just your personal day-to-day. You just run into something, and wow, that's kind of cool. I didn't know anything about that. So,
Yeah. I think conferences like this, being lots of reading in all our spare time, but keeping track of what the industry is doing, what your competitors are doing, and being open to equating what's happening in a different industry and saying how can you adapt that to regulated industries. And so I think that's just kind of being curious helps be able to find that diamond in the rough.
I think that's exactly right, Jen. I would say I also ask all of my agencies, because they're working with many more clients than us, what is everybody else doing? What should I be jealous of? I'm in the content marketing space, so it's specifically about that, but what's new, what's next, what's after podcasts? I met with the New York Times yesterday, and I said, how are you guys doing podcasts, and what's working for you? And then in your spare time, yes, try to read voraciously to keep up with the competition.
Great. So at this time, I'd love to open it up to the audience here if you have any specific questions for our panelists. There's a microphone in the center of the room. Feel free to get in line as well and go through the questions either for the individual panels or for the whole group.
Great. So this question is for Carrie. I'm also in biotech space as well. It's great that you had top-down buy-in for social. I was in a different scenario where it was sort of grassroots, bottom-up. And what I really struggled with was the ROI equation. We were a team of 2 launching social back in the day. We had 0 budget. How do you get leadership on board to support these initiatives when you can't track ROI on free channels?
And let me ask a clarifying question. What do you mean by you can't track ROI? Are you able to look at any metrics and feed that back?
Metrics, but as far as from an ROI perspective, we didn't have much of a budget investment, so we're doing it shoestring. So what worked for you to be able to make the case?
I'm going to tell you about an early example of an organic win that helped our case a lot. We were lucky, in a sense. The company was going through a reputational crisis. And bear with me, because the Miss America pageant aired, and one of the contestants was a nurse, and she did her talent portion on being a nurse. And Johnson & Johnson has deep, deep equity in terms of supporting the nursing profession. And I want to make that point because we have championed that cause for over 20 years, and we had a right to play in the space. But the next day, The View took her to task and said, what was that woman, what kind of talent is nursing, and why was she wearing a stethoscope? Only doctors wear stethoscopes. And I want to point out that this was completely free, okay? And we were playing in a part of the company that was non-regulated. It was the corporate equity space. But we made a decision to take a stand on the corporate social channels for the first time in history. That's 130 years, not of social channels, of J&J. And just say, nurses, we support you. We've always had your back, and we disagree with the comments on morning TV. And then we were able to partner with our corporate equity team, and they have this amazing app called Donate a Photo, where anytime you take any digital picture, you can donate it to a cause, and we will send $1 to that cause. Overnight, they stood up a new charity to support future nurses going to school, and we were able to transcend the media maelstrom of The View and turn it into a completely positive campaign. To date, even with all of the paid efforts and how we've gotten more sophisticated, that was our most successful social media campaign in history. And what it did was, we had been in the New York Times about the reputational issue we were covering off on. The next morning, we were on the cover of the Daily News for our commitment to nursing. So on social, we were able to newsjack because there was this Nurses Unite viral hashtag that went global, and plug into that conversation where we had a right to say something, and it totally shifted the conversation. So I would say it doesn't have to be that big. I often say we're waiting for our next Miss America, and those things don't happen every day. But what can you look to where you can start to put up even some organic posts, which you don't need any support to do, as long as you can write and post those things. And I would say start to reflect that back to whoever your stakeholders are. Look how many people like this comment. Imagine what we could do if. And I will often show things that say then and now. Here's what we were doing then. Here's what it looks like now. And here's how we've moved the needle incrementally. And also pull quotes from Mark Zuckerberg. What are the trends in social to use that thought leadership to present the way the world is looking at social? So if you're looking for paid budget and or you know organic is no longer enough, use those voices to support your cause.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, panelists. My name is Alex Baden. I'm the founder of a RegTech company in New Jersey that builds sales and marketing compliance monitoring software. We also host a event where a lot of these issues are discussed, the partnership between compliance and marketing sales. Anyway, my question is about budgets. And often when you're bringing innovation into the enterprise, it touches different groups. In our case, one of the challenges that we have to work through often is who pays for it. Because it's enabler for compliance, but it's really enabling the business to acquire more customers faster, but it's a tool used by compliance. So I'm wondering how your different industries deal with that. Maybe we could start with you, Christy, in the financial services in terms of like how does the decision get made in terms of who's going to pay for an innovative piece of software or a campaign when multiple groups benefit from it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think probably each financial institution is a little different, but for us, technology is paid for by technology. So it's not so much the question of who's going to pay for it, but the question of is that really where the bank wants to invest their money? And so the way that we get buy-in, because my channel doesn't bring revenue, we're pure expense, but if you can prove that you're engaging your customers, you're building that relationship. And for Comerica Bank, that's what we're all about. We're a relationship bank. We want to have a relationship, understand our customer, and help them. So it's more about demonstrating why we need to do something, what value does that bring to the customer, which ultimately will come back to the bank. Then at that point, the bank will say, yeah, we should be investing here. And then it's just, a process, right, really.
Okay. Thank you.
Any follow-up from anybody else?
I would say again, one example for us is we have to monitor our social media channels 24/7 for adverse events and product quality complaints and ladder those up to the right folks. I pay for that out of my budget, but the larger question I would say is how do we demonstrate how that's helping the business? Because it's not just monitoring for AE and PQC. What we've now seen is by the fact that we have people responding to every person who raises their hand on social, there have been opportunities that have benefited the brands at J&J. For example, a young girl who wrote in and said she had cancer at the age of 4 and she wanted to donate 1,000 boxes of Band-Aids to the cancer center that had treated her. And we were able to partner with the Band-Aid team to send those Band-Aids to her and to donate to the charity that had paid for her treatment. I'm then taking that use case back to the consumer call center and saying, hey, we might want to start partnering on providing this capability. So I would say when you're presenting what you do, don't present it to the team of who's going to pay for this. Talk about the ways that you can enable their departments to do something differently.
Super. I might bring this back to the regulator and their position within the regulated industries. So I run an accelerator, a startup accelerator in the aviation and travel space, another highly regulated area. We looked at the regulator problem and said there has to be another way of approaching this. So we actually engaged the regulator in what we were doing. It's taken us a year, but we now have that regulator signed up as a partner, and not only that, they've actually invested in our program to show that they're highly committed. I'm wondering what you guys have done to reach out to the regulator to encourage new pathways for innovation in your areas.
So as I mentioned earlier, we're part of formal organizations that's what they do. They work with our regulators, with our senators, and make sure we're connected that way. We also build out the relationship with our specific regulators. So making sure that they're understanding not just what we're doing, but why we're doing it, and hopefully gaining some insight back around whether directionally we're okay. So I do think it's important to build that. It's not, at least in my industry, it's not going to give us an answer until it's time for an audit, but building the relationship has helped a lot.
Yeah, whether that's with people who used to be at the regulation industry and so have that experience and that lens, and they can partner with you, or if you can, there's ways we can pre-clear content that's going to go out into the public domain. So getting that stamp of approval beforehand, or being able to course correct so that you don't run a TV spot and then get a letter from the FDA or FTC that there's a problem with it. So trying to bring people along on the journey, getting as much input as possible, and yeah, to your point, that partnership and that trust also, that as companies that we, sometimes it's self-policing. There's not always, especially in the social space, there's not specific guidelines. So it's showing the integrity and the care to not knowingly violate a rule, so that you build up that trust, and so that if there is a little bit of a gray area, they'll tend to give you the benefit of the doubt and kind of talk to you before it escalates into a bigger issue.
Thank you.
I'd follow up with you, Christy, because I think as an interesting point, are there points in time where the regulator brings a specific issue and then they're actually leading the way? So for banking, fraud, security, those are things where I know that's sort of eclipsed what the industry's doing. What are some of the processes you go to when you're listening and looking at it from an industry-wide as opposed to just from a bank?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and it makes a good point, because we are working in tandem with the regulators to become educated, right? The space is moving so quickly. We do have the framework in place of the regulations that exist. And then we have our own process on top of that, which usually is more stringent. And we look at the areas of protecting the customer, so the security aspect, protecting the bank from the fraud aspect, and really trying to do our own checkbox, if you will.
Hi, so I run a compliance-based real estate marketing startup. So as a startup, how do you drive change in a heavily compliance-based industry and encourage early adopters for new service or technology? So essentially, how do you suggest driving adoption rates in an early stage startup?
I mean, I think that's what we were saying in terms of showing the value of what you're offering. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's luck in finding the right champion. So I think it's that tenacity to tell your story and get out in front of people, because you never know who's going to be that champion for you. So it's really investing your time not only in what your product and looking inward, but looking outward, looking at where the industry that you're working in is going, and anticipating that, and kind of intersecting the need and the people that you're talking to with what you're building. So it's a lot about just getting out there and being promotive of yourself, but when you do get the attention of people, knowing your pitch and getting it out there.
And I think also making sure that you are speaking in the same language as the person you're talking to. So in my case, well, how is this going to help my customer? What pain point does my customer have that would justify our desire to go down this path?
And I would also say, if you're a young female entrepreneur, tell your company story and also tell your story, because that could be a way to garner more media interest, and get you more entree.
All right, thank you.
Our last question here.
Hi, I have a question for Jennifer and Carrie. I practice social marketing in pharma, and I noticed that sometimes once you find a solution or an approach to compliance, sometimes your teams can lean into that iterative nature, and I wondered how you both fight complacency in your respective cultures.
That's an excellent question, especially in regulated industries, because once you find something that works, you don't, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But at the same time, the world is changing and the expectations are changing. So It's really just giving that freedom to your team to think differently, to approach things in a new way, and making them have that permission to try new things and know that, even if it's not something we act on right away, it's something that just them bringing the idea is appreciated. And so it's really just about how you're motivating them, and that they can then see if we are actually implementing things that those get better results or different results, so that it challenges you and keeps you wanting to find that new cool thing. And I mean, literally, a cool thing has been a GIF, for some of our clients. But it's being aware of that and not resting on your laurels.
Yeah, I think people don't only get complacent, they get busy. And you're so busy checking off your to-do list that you forget to do that. So take time out and schedule a brainstorm. And I really do believe in the what you're jealous of game. So ask them to all go look in the wild for what other people are doing and how do you think we could be doing this slightly better, and let them be the one to bring you the idea and get excited about implementing it.
That's awesome. Thank you.
All right, last question, and then we'll have the panelists wrap up.
Okay, we'll go for the last question here. So I've heard a couple things just in terms of encapsulating what you're talking about in regulated industries. Long lead times, nothing happens very quickly, long return on investment, so that implies a certain scale from an enterprise perspective for both the vendor and the entity. I heard working with CFPB on getting some innovation, but they have a different interest than the actual regulator people that have been around for a while. So for all of you, if you have kind of an experience of getting actual regulations changed, I spent time in the financial arena professionally, and then also in a nonprofit perspective in the health arena, and you have a lot of rules that are written literally almost 100 years ago that govern the things we do, and so you're trying to cobble together the world from the 30s and 40s onto today with regulations and requirements. And so that process, if you have examples of working with the regulators, say, hey, this doesn't really make sense, here's a technology solution, and here's how we can move forward together and change that.
Yeah, I can give you a pretty recent example. So we have been advocating on Capitol Hill for what was called the Mobile Banking Act that just went into place, right? So essentially what that said was customers really ought to be able to agree to, e-signature and all the terms and conditions around that on a mobile device. They don't have to be at a desktop computer. And it's logical, it makes sense. But to your point, it's just regulation that had been in place for a long time, and people get busy, you just, it's not on the to-do list. So making sure that we're, again, really finding those pain points and then advocating for the customer and the bank. And it paid off in that example.
Yeah. Any others?
Not directly, no.
Yeah, we
Great.
try, but it doesn't always work.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So I'll wrap it up with the panelists here, and the story I would say is when you have that great idea, that great innovation, what is that one thing that you want to do to help build advocacy for it in your respective organizations?
So I would say just don't give up. So, he was right. It's a long lead time. It's cumbersome. But if you believe in what you are doing, I believe in what you are doing, we're going to be successful. It might take us a long time to get there, but just don't give up.
Yeah, I echo that. It's the tenacity, and it's also being unique, bringing something different and special, and that helps the business, but also and be nice. Really be somebody who we want to work with and want to work with every day.
I would say the same thing. It's going to be a long-term relationship, but in the best possible way. Demonstrate that not only are you solving the problem, you're on my side, and I'm going to be on your side too for the long term. And then when my boss comes to me and says, hey, can you recommend a solution for X? You're going to be the person that I recommend. And I would also say, it's so easy whenever you're looking at a big number, 130,000 employees, biggest company. People are people, whether it's a regulator you're dealing with or an idea you're introducing to a company, it's relationship-based, and that's always going to be the best way to start.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone, and thanks for our panelists for being here today. If you want additional follow-up, we'll be across the hall at the CI&T Lounge. throughout the afternoon. Thank you.